Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, I know we had just put out our last episode a couple of days ago, but there's been a lot of news, a lot of speculation, and I figured what good would we be if we didn't put in our own take on this? And we have a few other stories to update, and this will also help alleviate some of the, let's just say, backup that the show gets to sometimes where we miss some of the stories. But, of course, as usual, I am your host, Constantine Martelli. We have GSP over here, my co-host.
Hi.
Once, yes, hello. The people love him. Our Slavic correspondent, the man who keeps this show on the rails. Thank you very much. Yeah, this man would take a bullet for me. I can't necessarily say the same. I kid, I kid. I certainly would, but I'm getting off track here. Of course, we are branching out. I have the BitChute channel operational. I'll be uploading episodes there before. And once again, once I get past my boomer tech skills, I will be uploading the MP3 audio files onto Substack. So you'll also be able to do it there, especially if you want just like an audio only version. But don't worry, if you don't like YouTube or if we disappear one day, we will be other places. And I plan on finding more places. I hate to inform you, we're not joining Rumble unless we absolutely have to. I know that breaks your heart, but
It does.
we are going to just get into the story
Yeah.
about Ukraine right away. So I figured before we get into some of the big speculations, you can just give us a brief update on the happenings or lack thereof on the battlefield.
Right. So it's been 2 weeks now, and really there aren't any new gains by the Ukrainians. So the front lines have stabilized. The only gains are again these micro gains that the Russians are performing around Marienka, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and a weensy bit in Soledar from the last time that we spoke. This is, I think, 3 days now. Uh, there was an attempt for the Ukrainians in the north, in the sort of Liman direction, just east of there, where they tried to break through yesterday, but that didn't work out. There was another attempt in the Kherson western side, south of Kryvyi Rog, where the Ukrainians tried to bust through, I believe, on Saturday. Um, Not as big a contingent as the one that we spoke about, which took place, I believe, on the Wednesday or Tuesday of last week. So that one had a lot of casualties because they're using now at least 2 battalions for, I guess, what would you call it? A kind of a tactical combative reconnaissance. Like it's a big reconnaissance grouping. So there's larger losses when that happens. But the Russians are also, of course, taking losses as well. Looking at some of the videos today and yesterday, their losses are not as much. However, the other big news. I mean, we'll get to dirty nukes and all that eventually, but the other main story is we've heard about Kherson being evacuated, but now Mayor Kim of Nikolaev, or as the Ukrainians call it, Mykolaiv, um, has asked everyone to leave the city. And this will tie in with what we're talking about with reference to the dirty bomb uh, theory. So, um, Ukraine has repeatedly said that they're going to blow up the dam that would effectively cut off Kherson city from the rest of the territory south of it on the east side of the Dnieper River. The Russians have been gradually releasing more and more water, and the Dnieper is getting shallower. So there is less chance of like the kind of enormous flooding that would like basically endanger civilians. That is what I can tell you is going on. One last thing I would say is There now somebody, I forget his name. It wasn't Zaluzhny. It was somebody else in Ukrainian command, but he basically said today that he thinks that the Russians are not going to abandon Kherson. In fact, they're going to reinforce. And this is why they want the civilians out. We said this on the last show that that was probably what was happening. So, I still hear rumors of 60,000 men in Kherson. Ukrainians are waiting for the battle. It very well could happen this week. We don't know. We don't know how the front line will change. They might go somewhere else. There was an article, I think, from the Washington Post or the New York Times, for instance, talking about Bakhmut, that they acknowledge that the Ukrainians are exhausted there and they're slowly losing ground, and that largely Wagner, even though outnumbered, is mostly responsible for this. But and the last bit of news is, today was fairly quiet, and so was yesterday. But the 12 days from October 10th to October 22nd, we saw constant barrages of cruise missiles and drones by the Russians. And now every night you can see on Telegram channels, Odessa is completely blacked out, Kiev is blacked out, Kryvyi Rog is blacked out, several towns and cities now, Kharkov, for instance, is blacked out. So they've acknowledged now that 40% of their capacity for producing electricity is destroyed. And I think this is what's worrying them, that the Russians might be planning a large offensive. The Ukrainians today announced yet another mobilization. So there's a conscription for any able man, 60 and under, to join the military, the Ukrainian forces. And I think, this is October 24th. People are going to hear this on October 25th. Time is running out. November will be much more difficult. I saw other articles in Western papers saying that a Russian assault in winter favors the Russians to go on an assault. We'll see. We don't know.
Also worth noting that when you listen to this on the premiere date, October 25th, it will be exactly 3 weeks away from the midterm elections. In which case, next episode, I will have my prediction maps up. But that's also something to keep in mind because that's been a big contingent on the direction that the Ukraine war is going to go. Some people think that the Republicans taking control of at least one chamber of Congress may affect the U.S. policy towards the war effort. I'm skeptical of that, but it could lead to at least a bit of stonewalling. But I'll get into it later, but there are stories about some Democratic dissent from the war effort. But as you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll get into, the less sort of military aspect of the news about Ukraine and get into, I suppose, the larger geopolitical picture regarding Ukraine. But as far as all that, I suppose now we can discuss, this whole thing with this dirty bomb that because of course the West and Ukraine have been saying for ages now that Russia is going to use nuclear weapons. If they do, America has to intervene, and so on and so on. And I've been saying this for a while, right? Like, the plan that the U.S. is using is the identical plan that they used for the Russian Revolution during World War I. It's the same thing. Okay, it's literally the same plan. It's not. There's virtually no difference. All right, Russia's in a war. You have to, make it seem as if, um, things are falling apart. You have protests. Now, of course, Russia in 2016, 17 was in much more economic straits than it is now, right? But they're still going with the same plan. They still think like maybe there's a way that Navalny can become president. I know it's preposterous, right? But essentially, British agents would organize these protests, and I have a very interesting bit of information from somebody on Twitter. I'll check this out, but I think this is true because I've watched other programs and read other sources about this. Um, he talks about a protest that was organized in St. Petersburg in 2017, where the Russian military broke it up and so on. Because you have a picture of a BLM tier march during wartime led by two confirmed British agents under specific leadership of Pinchas Moses' son Rubenstein. He would literally strangle his protege Gapon,
That is
the
a hell of a
nominal
name.
leader. I know. 1 year later, with the major objective of shooting Nicholas II. So we're seeing the same groups, the same people are interested in bringing down Russia, the same two identities. That hasn't changed.
Oh, they're arrogant enough to
And
think they can do an almost beat for beat replication of what they did about 105 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
It's the pinnacle of arrogance, the only thing I can call it, or an act of deep desperation, or perhaps a combination of both.
Right. And then you have the famous tweet by David Rothschild on the 28th of February of this year, 4 days after the invasion. Thousands of years from now, there's going to be a Jewish holiday centered on the exploits of Zelensky. And while the details will be fuzzy and or wrong,
And
the
powdery.
moral will be little Jewish girls and boys can grow up to be badass leaders of multicultural democracies, right?
It's I
Like
thank you. I hate it.
they're
I know I
very
sent it to you,
serious,
but
right?
it's
Mm.
it's horrible. It's just horrible.
It is. It's horrible. These people don't want to be proven wrong, right? They will go to incredible lengths, right? And they will work with the other identity group that I was talking about in order to subdue Russia once and for all, right? Take the resources. Uh, but let's get into the whole dirty nuke, dirty bomb thing. As a preamble, since July, the Ukrainians have been bombing the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which effectively could, if they were really successful. Now the plant has been turned off after many months of shelling. I think it got turned off at the end of September, or the first few days of October. Um, you know, I think the Ukrainians see this as a way to get the the UN or the US. They want some other entity in Ukraine. They do not believe that they can win this without them there, right? And they thought that they could get a demilitarized zone with like Ukrainian soldiers patrolling, like as if that was ever going to happen. But that's what they thought. And the main boss of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was found to have essentially given them details. Maybe he gave them details like where you should try to aim so that you cause panic, but you don't blow it up. Who knows? And the fact of the matter is, the Russians are sometimes knocking these shells as they're flying over from several miles away. Um, what if they don't get a direct hit and they knock it this way or that way? The way a drone is shot down and it goes off course and hits something. In some ways, it's even more tragic, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the Forge case because that's been something that's been repeated since March. Because you'll recall, opening phases of the war, that was the concern. They tried to paint it as if Russia was committing this great crime, trying to cause a radioactive leak. And then that narrative got shelved for several months. It gets brought back up in September. That gets put up on the shelf again. And then around beginning of October, beginning of this month, they're saying, would Russia use WMDs? Would Russia use a nuclear missile in Ukraine? And they just kept prodding this and prodding this, and then they said, well, we have the capability to strike back, and then Russia said, well, so do we. And they used that as some sort of evidence that they were going to strike Ukraine, which it's. I mean, the only word I can think of it, and I'm going to I hate to even use this word, but it's pure gaslighting. That's the only way
Yeah.
you can put this, where they want you to think so desperately that it is. And of course, I'll get more into the details of it and what I think is probably going to happen in my speculation on the likelihood of something like this happening. But if they were to successfully pull off an operation like this, skepticism of it would be a social death sentence with anywhere in the Western world. If you, I mean, questioning the incidents in Syria was bad enough, but if you were to just raise any eyebrows about this, it would be done. Like, honestly, this would be the story that would get Tucker Carlson yanked off the air if you want a good example of how how ideologically conformed they would want you to be about this story in particular, which is
Yeah.
why I don't think they would pull something like this just yet. And again, there's several smaller details that involve Ben Wallace and his trip to DC, and some of the incidents there that may cast some doubt on this or may make you raise some eyebrows at this whole narrative in general. I I'll hold what I personally think, and I'll let you give the details before I get too far ahead of it. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, what's the advantage of the Russians blowing up? Like they have a tactical nuke. Why would they? Why would they use a dirty bomb in Nikolaev? That makes no sense, right? Now the Russians sort of planted this narrative. I think as a counter narrative, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Because the nuke talk has really ramped up the more territory that the Russians ceded to the Ukrainians all throughout September and the first 8 days of October. And um, the nuke talk is again to bring fear into the Russian public so that they don't support the war, because they know that unless the Russians are pulled out by their population, there is over an extended period of time, the Ukrainians are not going to get back Crimea. They're not going to get back any of the territory that they wanted. That eventually is going to be too difficult for them to outlast the Russians in a slug match, right? So they have to preempt that. That has to the bad news has to be amped up all the time. The sense of disaster. This has failed. We should never have done this. They should have just genocided those people. They should have left anyways. Blah blah blah. Right? You can imagine the narratives. So the nuke. That's what the nuke talk particularly furnishes for the purpose of the narrative. Um, you know, when that was sort of falling apart, then you got the story about the 101st Screaming Eagle Airborne. What are we? Maybe we shouldn't say it
Yeah,
on air.
yeah. It's let's just say it's
Just take a look at
yeah.
the 101st Airborne in 2022 and compared it to like 1945.
Let's just say it's
Like,
vibrant and diverse. And I made I made an interesting comment off air regarding that particular instance. That if this show were a BitChute exclusive, I would certainly use that word. but I feel like playing it a little safe today. But do continue.
Yeah. Right. And so then you had that story. Now that story has been discredited because one of the reps for the Pentagon said, "We are not going to enter into Ukraine." Again, it's there to cause panic. That they're going to go in, they're going to go in, they're going to go in, they're going to go into Belarus. It's there to keep the tension as high as possible, right? Um,
I mean, this is
now,
traditional Cold War posturing where you are
yeah,
keeping your opponent on your toes constantly with a bit of uncertainty. And I know a lot of people will compare this to Cuban Missile Crisis. Personally, at this point, I think that's a bit of a stretch. But once again, there's several instances, not only throughout the Cold War, but just with geopolitics and imperial politics in general, when you have this sort of posturing that doesn't necessarily lead to war, you do want that element of uncertainty. So if you put these so-called elite American troops in NATO countries that border Ukraine, that's part of it. It's pressuring it, saying, "Oh, we can go in at any time." And once again, a lot of people will read into this, and that will become sensationalized because that's the way these media cycles normally end up going. So, again, and that's also what part of this whole dirty bomb speculation is as well. So it's like I'm not outright dismissing any of this, but I'm saying it has to be taken with a very large grain of salt.
right. And then you mentioned the news cycle. So the Sunday is the forecast for what the news cycle will be through the week. And now, if the Americans on Monday are saying, we're not going in, that basically tells you what the news cycle is going to be for the rest of the week, till Friday. Who knows? Um,
And you'll recall
I mean,
the exact opposite happened with the last strikes on Syria in 2018, where it was like, "Oh, we might go in. Oh, we'll probably go in. Oh, you better back down." And it was that like work week long lead up, that Monday through Friday scheduled lead up, until the strikes took place on a Friday night or Saturday morning Syria time. But there was
right.
never a denial that it was going to happen on Monday night, for example, and then they just did a 180. Now, there's nothing stopping them from doing that, but if we're just judging on previous trends and the way these things work, that's what you have to look at.
Right. And I don't think the Russians would hesitate striking them. The Russians have already struck them. The amount of American advisors and SAS advisors from Britain and Yaroviv, like, there's at least a few that got killed there. There's no question
And
about
then
it,
there was that
right?
speculated capture that Ukrainian general, not Ukraine, Canadian general, even though they sort of blend together after a certain point. But
He still has not been found.
yeah, I was about to
They
say
still
he
have
was
not
at
been.
Avastal and he went missing. So the idea that NATO personnel, even high-ranking NATO personnel, might be caught in the crossfire of this and might be put in harm's way hasn't led to an Article 5 situation yet.
Right. And, Azov Battalion did train with Canadian instructors, right? So it's not, and this guy was wanted for like a rape charge, and he has not shown up. I'm not speculating one way or the other, but as long as we're talking about speculation, to return to the dirty bomb thing, I would say that, let's say, because Zelensky, said if we're attacked, America should be obligated to like nuke or attack the Kremlin and all this, right? And all of this flows back to, um, I guess, maybe even the Rothschilds basically saying that, we have to make a hero of this guy. The West is obligated to make a hero of Zelensky, and so far they have. That's who's going to be remembered in the end. It won't be Azov. So, um, but if we return to the dirty bomb, right? Now, I don't recall the Ukrainians ever saying that they're going to, light a dirty bomb, which is, not a nuclear weapon, but they have boasted that they could or would make a nuclear weapon. And I think, for me, the biggest concern was when, what's his name, the British Minister of Defense,
Wallace.
Wallace, when like a day before Liz Truss lost her premiership, Wallace flew to Washington to meet with Pentagon officials there. I'm presuming Milley for at the very least, right?
Yeah, that
Maybe
Lloyd
even Austin,
Austin, Sullivan, etc.
right? And so that that was kind of conspicuous, right? Like you have this political turmoil going on in your country, and you fly to the U.S., right? You would think like this is probably something quite serious, and it probably was. And some have speculated that this could indicate that the Ukrainians might have been working on something, and that the Russian narrative isn't completely fake. Now, I'm undecided either way because of what Wallace said next. So, about a day after that he was in Washington, I saw stories where he states that communications in NATO with the UK have been compromised. British communications have been compromised. It's a very odd thing to admit. Like in the Cold War, you would never admit that, which leads me to believe that they were not compromised. And maybe like the narrative isn't true, or it could be true. It could be true in the sense that maybe they worked on this idea, and this is a way that they could distance themselves from the Ukrainians. You know, about a month after Daria Drugina was assassinated, uh, there was an article where the Pentagon said, "Yeah, it was the Ukrainian government who did this. We had nothing to do with it." It could be something like that, where they want to create a distance between themselves, where they think this is bad PR. And this is a hit that Ukraine will have to take. You know, there are other stories of Ukrainians don't always obey American orders within their military. So, you know, that's another. I personally think, though, we're seeing the end of the dirty nuke thing. I could be wrong, but I think there's about as much that can be squeezed out of it that it's already been squeezed out. And so,
Yeah, unless they're actually going to do it at this point, they're going to shelve this narrative because at this point it's going to become a matter of speculation, frankly, a lack of legitimacy when you keep saying they're going to do it any day now. They're going to do it any day now. Similar actually to what the Russian Ministry of Defense would do with the Syrian situation with some of the false flags when
mhm.
they would say several times over and over it's going to happen and then it never did. Now, perhaps them calling it out, saying that they're planning on doing this, did in a way foil the plan and already sowed the
Mhm.
seeds of doubt. So there is something to
Yeah.
be said with that, and perhaps that's also the same case with what the Russian MOD said about this dirty bomb narrative. But
Mhm.
again, there's only like a lot of it becomes a war of words and a war of diplomats as much as it is a battlefield. In which case, they do become a feedback loop, and they've always been a feedback loop. And to the point where, at least in this scenario right now, the words being spoken take priority over the action on the ground, especially considering the fact that the action on the ground has been rather stagnant for the past couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it could even be something as simple as um, wanting to keep people's interest in the war going, you know? Um, so each side might have different reasons why they're pushing a nuke narrative. Um,
Well, speaking of
it's
theories,
hard to
that
say.
that does bring.
Maybe somebody else in the chat has a better idea, but
Speaking of theories and speculations, that brings me to a theory and speculation I heard that I would like to share. Unfortunately, I can't remember who exactly came up with it, so I can't give credit. But we're running into a very real possibility that if Ukraine loses this, which becomes more and more likely given the way things have gone, that you will likely see Zelensky or whoever his successor is set up a Ukrainian government in exile, even if Ukraine still remains a sovereign
mm,
state, in order to just keep the cash flow going, in order to keep collecting those
yeah.
funds. So that is also a very real possibility. And I guess Canada already has this problem, but you could see the case where Ukrainian diaspora become like the new Cuban lobby, who have this very outsized influence on Western foreign policy moving forward, and that a lot of things have to be dictated with that. For example, how Cubans practically run the Florida GOP. You could get a situation where a large concentration of Ukrainians within the states, within Canada, or within some parts of Western Europe control segment of the population that can actually swing political decisions, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. I think that's already starting to become the case, where you have a lot of these diaspora nationalist voices are becoming very outsized. I saw an interesting article from the Washington Post saying that Ukrainian Americans, at least in the Ohio Senate race, were going to and now of course they could have cherry picked this, but they said more Ukrainian Americans who traditionally leaned Republican are voting Democrat because of X, Y, or Z reason. They think that Biden's doing the right thing, and the Democrat candidate's going to continue to support Ukraine. Blah blah blah. But so what I'm getting at is, while that case might not be anything in and of itself for any of these other individual cases, you're starting to see the groundwork for a Ukrainian diaspora lobby similar to the Cubans and similar, honestly, to like the Jewish population with Israel.
Right, and that lobby worked very hard to stop Trump from getting elected in 2016, and worked very hard to get him impeached, and also worked very hard for him to not get elected in 2020. They weren't, what did they call them? Mules, of course, but um, one of them was recently released, who did lie to the FBI, but you know, uh, it was deemed that he hadn't lied. It's just nonsense. Anyhow, I want to say, from the last show, I said that, and I just before the show aired at work, I thought about what I said the last show, where I said, um, Biden is going to give $50 billion for all of next year, because he anticipates the Republicans not to give as much, or might severely cut spending for Ukraine. And our friend Leonid Schwartzen in the chat said that's probably not the case. It's so funny because just a few hours before the show, that's literally what I thought. So I just want to give a shout out. This is going to be an excuse to give actually even more in 2023 than in 2022.
Yeah, this is one of those
That's all it
uni-party
is.
situations where no matter who wins, the taps are going to keep flowing. As you just said, it's actually an opportunity for them to outdo the Democrats and say, well, the Democrats are the real chickens here, and we're the ones who are strong and going to stand up to Russia, blah, 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 blah.
I love how conservatives and Republicans always fall for the bait. They always do whatever it is that liberals, New Labor, Democrats, they're always the leaders. Conservatives, Tories, Republicans, they're always the fools.
Well, I've said this before. The Western conservative is little more than an attack dog who gets some table scraps sometimes.
Hmm.
And at that rate, like, you can't really put it that way. Where you can have this nationalistic triumphalism, you can have these feelings of intense patriotism, so long as they're juxtaposed against a foreign power halfway across the world fighting in some ethnic conflict that you have no ties to. But if you want to be a nationalist for your own people, for the actual interests of your nations at home and abroad,
That's
you know,
dangerous.
oh yeah, that's dangerous. That's a new fascism. That's a Trumpism. That's a Christian nationalism. That's a extremism. Whatever number of words they want to tag onto that. But if you want to express those feelings through a frivolous conflict halfway across the world, that is a-okay. And that's exactly what the funnel exists for, because they're taking
Yeah.
these sentiments that would otherwise be something that they would suppress and actually refocusing them for their benefit. It's quite an ingenious system, and as you said, time and time again, conservatives fall for it. Nowadays, it seems to be slightly less, but there's still enough for this trap to work.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep.
Well, that is all I had for the situation on Ukraine, except one last tangential story to Ukraine, which is Jeffrey Sachs continues to make very
Yeah,
strange comments, all things considered, given his background, somewhat distant comments where he was speaking. I can't remember. It was at one of these forums that these important
it
people
was in
speak.
Athens. It was some kind of a democracy forum.
Oh, the democracy form in Athens. How
It's so
quaint. How
ridiculous.
quaint. And he was saying that the U.S. since 1950 has been the most violent country in the world in terms of its actions towards other countries. And you'll recall he's been the one saying that maybe this war effort in Ukraine isn't sustainable. Maybe there were those lab leaks. Him and Musk have been, I'll put it this way, strangely transgressive, but not so transgressive that they are exiled from the elite and actually charged for crimes that they've committed. And once again, a lot of those, especially business regulations, exist to keep people like that in line because they all violate those laws. The only ones who get prosecuted are the ones who go against the grain. So it is strange because you see both him and Musk going in that direction. How genuine either of them are, I really don't know. And as we were discussing off air, Sachs and I would say even to an extent Musk do seem a bit like contrarian types. Like they have fun going against the grain to an acceptable degree, and they have fun playing the devil's advocate or whatever, or taking the opposite side. But they never do it as much as you would actually need to get any significant change. And again, both of those are fantastically wealthy men who are heavily invested in business enterprises that are rather large in the United States and worldwide, who actually could, maybe not single handedly, but have the power to start some sort of movement if they really wanted to. Not that I'm under any illusion that either of them are going to be these great distant leaders, but point being is, they have this power, they have this influence, yet they still stay safely in between the lines, and they still stay safely in their lane, but are allowed to be this questioning force every once in a while. And I don't know. I've just been intrigued by what angle is Sachs taking as of late. Like, what's he trying to do? Is this just for his personal notoriety? Is this some sort of op where he's supposed to be the controlled opposition sort of guy? I really can't make heads or
Hmm.
tails of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a professor to some capacity at Columbia University, and he's director of the Center for Sustainable Development at that university. And I know that he had some kind of involvement within Russia during the 90s. I do think, though, like the thing, okay, let's bring up Kissinger. Kissinger was always for expansion of NATO, right? But when Kissinger said that Ukraine should just give up because they're going to lose so many men, it's not going to be worth it. He got lambasted. I mean, he was nearly canceled. Even he might have ended up on Mitro Dvorets, the Ukraine's
Oh,
kill
yeah,
list.
yeah. The Ukrainian hit list. That.
Yeah, Ukrainian hit list. Yeah, I mean, Musk was on it for a few days, and then they took him off. So, I would say that all of these guys, they do take chances with them, right? I mean, of course, part of it is to create the illusion that, well, look, we have a democracy. They don't have that. Like, even though, like, you can watch. I mean, if it didn't ban all the YouTube channels, you can watch Russian shows where there's different opinions, right? Now they're in a war in a way that America is not in a war. And if you're as old as I am, you'll remember how many voices that were against the war in Iraq were silenced. So there's nothing unusual in that sense if we're talking about maybe Russian censorship. But I've seen snippets here and there where there are differing opinions and so on. Okay, so part of it is to keep the illusion that you live in a democracy, right? That the government isn't overbearing. It's still quote unquote small in some ways, right? That free speech is not really infringed upon. That said, you have Sachs, Kissinger, and uh, his name has just disappeared. I can
Musk.
see his face. Huh?
Elon Musk, of course.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
Noam Chomsky.
I know, but
Now,
go
all of these guys, in one way or another, have gone too far for them. Their opinion on the Ukraine war has gone too far. John Mearsheimer is another one. McGregor, the former general, head of NATO European Command, uh, is on this list. So I would say that like this is something that they play with. I mean, they're in a sense they are obligated to some degree to keep the semblance of a democracy, right? Otherwise, like honestly, they would you would have a super dark Brandon speech,
ahead.
even darker than the one that we saw.
Pitch Black
So
Brandon. Oh no, that's
yeah,
and that's
it's only
not
red
Kamala, believe
light
it or not.
on him, and it's all black in the background, and then like some satanic figure appears. It's a trans marine. So I would say that uh, like they are obligated, but they can't always control them, right? These guys have, to a degree, have gone too far. You don't hear anything about Kissinger now. You don't hear anything from Noam Chomsky anymore. And I have a feeling, you're not going to see that much of Jeffrey Sachs after his comment, which is a brilliant comment because he said, up until before 1950 and in the 19th century, perhaps the most democratic country or second most democratic country was responsible for the most amount of killing in wars. So a democracy doesn't mean it's peaceful. It just means that it can generate wealth within and it can be super oppressive and imperialistic outwardly. So it doesn't make it all that different to other systems. And he is correct that after 1950, it is the most violent regime of the last, that would make it 72 years. So, and it's still a democracy, but the illusion, right? The narrative is democracies aren't like that.
Yeah, and I could actually go on at length about democratic peace theory and the idea that two democracies have never fought a war, and how that ostensibly ignores the entirety of World War One, at which point even the Russian Empire had some sort of universal male enfranchisement. However, they'll
Yeah,
say, "Oh well, women couldn't vote, so it isn't a true democracy." At that point, no country in the world would have been a true democracy. Blah blah blah. But point being is they it is this. The only thing I can really think of is a shifting of the goalpost where it wasn't real democracy. It wasn't real communism. It wasn't real democracy. And
yeah,
see,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
standards
That's
don't
right.
apply when they go against what we want. So, and it goes back to this whole golden arches theory thing too, where they'll come up with these things, and now I suppose the golden arches theory was proven correct because any country that does go to war will have McDonald's removed from it. But so yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a unfalsifiable theory because they just they actively it's ingenious, frankly. But yeah, as you were getting on about that, yeah, these individuals have gone too far. You won't hear much of them except for the odd thing here and there. I mean, you don't even see McGregor on Tucker Carlson anymore. You'll see him sometimes, but I mean, he's
Yeah,
disappeared even from that sort of circuit. And I know you can say what you want about Tucker Carlson, but I mean, he's the most distant figure in mainstream media. Whether that's legit or not, and how much that's controlled opposition, that's aside the point. That's not what we're discussing here. I'm willing to have that conversation another time, but again, it's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make here. So that's all I had for Ukraine. Unless you had any last stories, I can get into some of the European news.
I don't.
Okay, so
That's about it.
I will get into some of the European news. So, starting with this, the EU is threatening to transfer Russian assets to Ukraine, and that came, of course, after a lot of the initial speculation about the the dirty bomb, the WMDs, the whatever. Russia's going to commit some horrible atrocity, and we'll have no choice but to intervene. So there was that. Whether they actually followed through with that, I suppose time will tell. Perhaps more interestingly, you had some transgressive comments from the Romanian Minister of Defense who said that this war needs to end with negotiation, that this can't escalate infinitely or else we are all in trouble. He was quickly removed from his position. He quote unquote resigned, but we all know what happens when a minister or cabinet secretary resigns. It's usually a forced resignation. And again, that isn't that massive a story, but it shows what happens to any semblance of sanity within these governments during this time, or people who go too far against the grain, where they'll more or less just instantly be silenced. And it does bring up the question, which I'll get into, what will happen to some of these other European politicians who aren't even pro-Russia, but skeptical of the possibility of Ukraine winning this war at any cost, and the effects it actually has on the nations that they are residents of, that they are citizens of, that they are technically should be loyal to. You have protests in Moldova taking place upon the increase in energy prices and some of the disputes they had with the energy transfer with both Gazprom and the Russian state-backed oil company. And the Prime Minister of Moldova is, of course, one of these color revolution appointees who got in there, had some background with the World Bank, and just the usual profile you'd expect with somebody like this. So, although maybe not as fervently as a lot of other European countries, still did go along with some degree of sanctions on Russia and trying to isolate Russia. And Moldova is the first country we're really seeing mass movements against the policies that will likely cause great pain and suffering in Europe. And of course, you probably will see it in more significant and larger European countries as you get further into the winter and even further into next year. But it seems like, for the time being at least, Moldova is giving us a preview of what may be the case in several European countries with just massive amounts of discontent. I didn't get exact numbers, but I know in the capital of Chistanu, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Please correct me if any Romanians, if I have butchered that, I apologize. But the streets, at least from the camera angles I saw, which I know that can be deceptive, are flooded with people who are just in complete discontent with the current government policy regarding this, and people who are honestly concerned about their own bottom lines. This is a rather apolitical protest in that sense, that people are afraid that because of these policies, they're simply not going to be able to make ends meet and continue on with their life as usual because of these energy sanctions. So, Moldova, it's a smaller nation, it's a poorer nation, but it may be a sign of things to come in Europe going forward.
Yeah, I mean we're seeing protests. I also saw an article from the Netherlands where there are 91 Dutch companies that have like a back door deal arrangement, some kind of clemency that allows them to still work with Russia. So there's something very, there is a lot of strangeness to this war. And I think, part of it is we expect
And those are
like,
the official channels. Think about how many of them are illegally violating sanctions. Probably quite a few.
right, right. So, but on energy, they're very serious about that. Now they're going to pay very exorbitant prices, and you know, well, the autists and the schizos want total war, and the normies want pure war. But war is always an extension of politics. So a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that is the case. It's just another means of achieving politically what you want. Um, of course, the results sometimes are completely devastating, and a
I mean,
country
it
never recovers after that. But
it is interesting to revisit the point on democracy we were just talking about with that summit in Athens with Sachs and all that quaint little pro-democracy summit. That something you'll learn, and
yeah,
even
I
the
should give you some info on that.
um,
Go ahead. You finish, and I'll tell you. This is
I mean,
mind-boggling.
if you just want perspective about, again, you were referencing, I believe it was was it Clausewitz who said politics is war is the continuation of politics by other means. But I
Yes.
mean, like, even in like your intro political science classes as a college dropout, I can tell you that one of the things they say is democracy is good because it lets people debate issues rather than take to
Ah,
violence over them. I mean, of course,
yeah.
that's the like standard narrative that you'll get, but I do think it's interesting that even they admit that.
Right, right. But this Athens Democracy Forum. So the guy who interrupts Jeffrey Sachs is a guy named Stephen Ellinger. He's the
There's that name
governor.
again.
He's the yeah, yeah. He's the governor of the Ditchley Foundation, which is funded by John Sawyers, former head of MI6. Isn't that weird? Um, Ellinger Erlinger has like another gig. He is the New York Times chief European diplomatic correspondent. He's kind of like the guy who creates these narratives. So you can see why he got so irked by by Sachs, right? He was like Sachs went too far, right? He took Sachs took advantage of their good graces, as it were.
Yeah, and it, like I said, I think that is some valuable insight when it comes to that as well. And it really does. I mean, it more or less just confirms everything that we've been saying, that other people in these spheres have been saying for quite some time. And it, I mean, there's really no other words you can put it in. And once again, like, honestly, I can just look at that sort of little, let's just be honest, party they have in Athens, and it's just so quaint. Is the word I can use to describe it. It's like
Mm.
it's it's a disgusting little show. I'll just put it that way. Continuing on with European news, you have the speculation earlier in the week. Now, this was around the time of, once again, the escalations in Ukraine, the escalation around the narrative in Ukraine, that the U.S. troops in Europe were actually going to set up a safe zone in Belarus in order for a government in exile. Playing on the Tinovskaya thing, was going to get mutinous army officials to lead a West Belarusian Republic against Lukashenko and his illegitimate government. So that, of course, didn't pan out. It probably won't pan out, but Belarus is sinking its teeth further into this. You see the rhetoric escalating. Of course, there was that incident a couple weeks back when the bridges were detonated between Ukraine and Belarus. So some are speculating that Belarus is also going to be the launching point of another attempt at Kiev by Russian forces. So that's something to also keep in mind, that I you have the attempts to destabilize there, of course, on top of further integration and further cooperation with Russia. So
Mhm.
so much that you can only speak factually before you get into the territory of speculation. But to get into some of the more interesting European stories, you do have Macron once again hinting at peace and saying that there should be negotiations, which is a narrative that he has been going on for a while. He said, according to the AP, that, quote, peace is possible when Ukrainians decide it. And he made similar remarks a few weeks back when the Ukrainian legislature passed a law saying that there can be no negotiation with Russia, that we will only negotiate through force of arms, and that Russia has to concede this, this, and this before we even accept any degree of talks. And Macron and French statements more or less said, get over it, you're going to have to negotiate with them soon enough. And this was also at the height of the speculation around the false flag in Odessa or the Nikolaev area. In that stretch, of course, the thing that we just uh, went through with the whole dirty bomb. So there was that as well, which shows that there are some European attitudes that are shifting, not necessarily away from Ukraine, but wanting to take a more moderated stance, and perhaps realizing that their initial support didn't work as well as they thought, so it's time to cut their losses and just lick their wounds on this one, which is why I think that Macron is trying to get at, because you'll recall, even during the opening phases of the war, he was very adamant about European support for Ukraine. He was very adamant about making sure Ukraine does stand against Russia. But I do believe, as much as I may dislike the man, out of all the Western leaders, he has the highest degree of pragmatism about him, and
Mm.
is willing to call a spade and say we need to reassess the situation and move forward with that. So you have that. You also had, as I said earlier, some U.S. Democrats getting that, but I'll get into that when I get into more of the U.S. news related to this. So continuing on with that, I just do have a brief update on inflation figures as of 2 days ago, and there are quite a few here. These are from September 2022. And I know these figures vary, but these are the ones after the fact that they have after being able to look at the whole month in retrospect. So there's quite a few here, so please bear with me. Estonia is at 24.1, Lithuania at 22.5, Latvia 22 even, Hungary 20.7. Keep in mind, Hungary has not even taken that aggressive a stance against Russia and is still being affected that much by European Union policy. Czech Republic at 17.8, Netherlands at 17.1, Poland at 15.7, Bulgaria 15.6, Slovakia 13.6, Romania 13.4, Croatia 12.6, Greece 12.1, Belgium 12.1, Denmark 11.1, Germany 10.9, and Austria 10.9. And at that point, the Russian inflation rate was 13.7. So while there are some European countries that are below that, most of the countries listed, and especially the ones that are on the frontier with Russia, are affected far more by the financial crisis and inflation than the Russians are. I mean, we've had this discussion before. Brussels, and by extension Washington, are willing to kneecap Europe if it means getting one over on Russia. And for a brief window there, it looked like that was successful. When you had some of the more successful Ukrainian counteroffensives in late August through mid September before the mobilization announcement. But now it's getting back to the point where these extreme economic measures are being taken on Russia at the expense of Europe in particular, and it seems to be preventing less and less as every week goes on. And again, we did this to death when we talked about the whole Nord Stream incident, how the U.S. will pillage the European economy to prop itself up for a few years before it meets the same fate, prop itself up enough to get Biden or whoever his successor is reelected before it all comes tumbling down, or however they want to take that. But again, just keep things relatively stable through the next presidential election cycle is what I think that they're probably trying to do with their current economic policies in the U.S. But you have the brunt of this borne by, ironically enough, these nations that are most fervent about these policies, such as the Baltic states, such as Poland. And that will only continue. It does make you wonder, and you had Germany, which is actually at one of the lower inflation rates, which is more discontented with this, especially considering the fact that their industrial sector is in a complete downward spiral. You had some protests in both France and Italy against NATO. Now, you get these protests every once in a while, even in times of relatively low tensions, where Paris or Rome will have these demonstrations saying exit NATO. It's usually from some more leftist group, or rarer but still happens from a more rightist group. But you had pretty sizable protests against NATO in both Paris and Rome over the past week. How much that will actually amount to, I don't know, but it does show that there's at least enough discontent to have a number of people on the streets going forward. But
Mhm.
uh, with that, we have, with these nations that are bearing the brunt of these policies, Croatian President Milanovic snubbed a visit from Nancy Pelosi, saying that he simply was too busy to meet with somebody who wasn't even the executive. And this was not only Pelosi, but a chance to meet with the delegation of U.S. members of Congress from both chambers.
He said that they wouldn't even be in office in 2 weeks, anyways.
I had missed that part. That's pretty good. And just to note about Milanovic, except having that very Balkan sense of humor that I can tell that you certainly share as somebody who is at least somewhat adjacent. I'm not going to comment too much on the intricacies of Balkan ethnicities. That's your rodeo over there. So
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. But again, I'll say that sense of Europe does seem to stretch down that belt of southeastern Europe, which I do greatly appreciate. But yeah, I didn't know about those comments. And Milanovic has been something of a renegade when it comes to the narrative on this, because when the war first broke out, he very publicly distanced himself from the prime minister and the parliament, who said that we need to give more aid to Ukraine, we need to be even more involved in this, when he was calling for something of a, not exactly neutrality, but probably the closest to neutrality that you can acceptably call for as a leader of a European nation at this time. So he has been consistently transgressive when it comes to these sort of things. He is of, and not that party affiliation really makes too much of a difference in this case, he is of a more rightist party, so that may affect his opinion on Pelosi. But it does seem like, at least from his position and the position of a not insignificant part of the Croatian population, as well as other European populations, that they are fed up with this. Now, are they large enough in number and influence to actually affect a change? At this point, it doesn't look like that. As the situation becomes more and more desperate in Europe and things become more and more volatile, perhaps they will be in a more influential position, or be in the position to seize more power and actually affect these changes. But once again, that's all baseless speculations. The idea of, let's just say, more level-headed parties sweeping across Europe, because even with some of the right-wing elections, like the new Italian government that was sworn in, it more or less is keeping the standard line on the Ukrainian conflict, which is support for Ukraine, which, I mean, is to be expected with a lot of these. With rare exceptions, it's a standard among Europe at this point, among European politicians, that you have to be pro-Ukraine to a degree. And Milanovic, once again, has actually distinguished himself as somebody who is as neutral as you can be. I'll just put it that way. And then, if you want other figures similar like that, I suppose you could point to Le Pen, Salvini, the usual milieu of those sort of people. But it does. I do appreciate that he actually made those comments that you said about them not being in office in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But
He's made some other comments against COVID and the whole gay trans thing. Like he's a wild.
he's
He
very
says a lot of.
transgressive.
He's very transgressive, and we were talking about this off air. Ukraine aspires to be like Croatia. Use NATO, get what you want, then betray NATO.
Oh yeah, it's perfect where they get to do all that. They get to have monuments to their controversial political and historical figures, and then
Yeah.
they get to say, when NATO asks for support, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll get to that later. Leave us alone." And I I mean, at that point, you've seen this try to be done in Poland. You've seen this trying to be done in the Baltic states, but it seems like, and Hungary is a whole different scenario because they've actually played a middle of the road here. But Croatia seems like the only country that has ever successfully played this game with NATO, and I don't know why they can get away with it.
I don't know either.
I would speculate it's simply because of size and geography, because, again, they aren't as large as Poland, and they're also far enough removed from Russia to the point where them saying this is just a blip on the radar, as compared to if you were to get these sort of comments out of, say, Poland or Lithuania or Estonia, where I think they tolerate that from Croatia, because as much as I love seeing it, as much as I hope that it does spread, Croatia is far less relevant than any of the aforementioned.
I think that's definitely a part of it. The other is Croatian leaders don't make it a habit of flying to Moscow as frequently as Orban. But I'll tell you something. I think Milanovic probably is thinking about this Turkish energy hub that is going to be shipping out Russian and Azerbaijani gas and oil. That way, the West will never be able to trace it because the Turks intentionally mixed the various oils. But there's also the question of the ship tankers, right? Russia's in the process of building all kinds of extra ship tankers right now because it's literally not enough. And the other is Croatia is by sea the gateway into the Balkans, right? And I think Croatia understands that this could be quite pivotal for them, economically speaking, right? If they can work out a deal with the Serbs and the Hungarians, right? This could go very well for all of them. And we've talked about this before.
I mean,
So who
excluding
knows?
Poland, you've already seen the V4 countries, or I suppose at that point it'd be the V3 countries, and again,
Yeah.
maybe the Czechs are a bit on the fence there, become more cooperative with Serbia and with that energy pipeline that goes, that Turk Stream pipeline and that whole energy flow in general. So it is funny when some of those V4 nations, such as Hungary, Slovakia, and maybe not Slovakia. Okay, maybe just Hungary. But point being is the Czechs and Slovaks are a bit on the fence when it comes to that in between, both
Yeah.
physically and politically speaking, in between the Poles and the Hungarians. But Hungary's cooperations with Croatia, uh, Serbia, and even to an extent Austria. You had that summit between Hungary, Serbia, and Austria a couple weeks back that had to deal with energy and these situations. It is interesting that as they've reoriented themselves, Hungary in particular, more southward as opposed to northward with Poland, things have been vastly more successful with them. And as you were saying, that it is a real potential for a breakthrough in the Balkans when it comes to energy. And although it probably won't alleviate a lot of the economic crisis, especially whatever cascades out of Germany, it will certainly be much more comfortable winter in somewhere like Croatia, not just because of the climate, than say Germany if something like this were to actually come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, plus also, us Balkan folks are more fickle.
Very.
So, you know, who knows? We might convince the other Slavs to chill out.
Perhaps it they you it's that proximity to the Mediterranean. I'm telling you, the
It could
Adriatic.
very well be. Yeah.
It's practically the Mediterranean. It's amazing. It's that temperament that is needed at this time, and I salute our Balkan friends, and that no particular comment on any nation in particular. I don't want to make any divisive comments here for the time being, at least. But I'll let you speak for me, actually being one of them insofar as that's concerned. But the last story I have for Europe here, and I can tell you're very excited with this one because you could
Mm.
not stop messaging me about this, is the UK now has a new prime minister. So would you like to take it away, reveal the name and
uh,
ethnicity of the new British prime minister to our wonderful audience?
yes, Britain has a new pagan leader. It's been over 1,000 years, and he's Aryan, so you know, it's just so ludicrous. So, as people were kind of guessing after what's his name, Kwasi Kwarteng was lost his position after nearly like sabotaging the entire British economy based on the guild system and the investment for pensioners essentially, right? Now, I have to say, I have to give credit where credit is due, but the Duran predicted that as soon as that happened, the Quasi would be gone. And then soon after, maybe not even a week, they said, Liz Truss is finished. It's over. And I just don't know enough about them. And the Mercurius guy of the Duran, he lives there. He's I think he was a young boy when his family moved there. I don't have the familiarity, and of course I listen to AA's streams, but
This is the first you've mentioned this. This is the first I'm hearing of it.
yeah, that's right. So, um, you know, they think it was a plot, and AA. I don't know if he's ever mentioned that, but they think this was a plot to get Rishi Sunak, the new pagan leader of Britain, who's also going to advise the king on selections for bishops in the Church of England. It's so gone.
It's
Uh,
I
it's
don't even know what to
horrible.
say.
Yeah,
It's I mean, look, I know we were just talking about that rather grisly case in France, but like I don't think anywhere in Europe, continent or island compares to the current state of the UK. Not even the Irish. And I know that's a very controversial comment with how far the Irish have fallen in recent years, but at this point, I think the UK is probably the most subjugated nation in Europe, even more so than the Germans, who are under quite literal military
maybe.
occupation.
Yeah, yeah. You, you don't need to have American. I mean, there are American bases on British soil, but you don't need to have them there. It's okay, guys. It's under control. Um, yeah. So on the first day, he already said that he's going to increase immigration from Pakistan and India, I guess, to help England heal because we've had these street battles between Hindus and Pakistanis. It's so retarded. And there was one disturbing tweet that I think, quite frankly, was right and scary, and that was like, this is kind of like going to be a future for a lot of Anglo countries, and the kind of nepotism that exists with these people, like maybe not, definitely not, my generation just bypass it. Your generation will have to deal with it, although it'll be probably different groups. But if you were in Canada, that this is like these groups are the most popular groups that are coming into Canada, and that's the way it's going to be. And it's I don't know what to say. Like I think it will go that way. In a decade, you're going to see huge, huge changes um, as a result of this. I just think it's noteworthy that the first day he's unelected, so he was selected. All this is because Liz Truss, essentially brought back.
Secured the bag.
So yeah, she secured the bag, 115,000 a year for the rest of her life. Jeremy Hunt is the guy who completely rewrote her entire economic plan and set it back. Like almost everything was changed 180 degrees the other way. Uh, and some people have speculated, as far as plots go, that they wanted they wanted Liz Truss because they knew the Queen was going to die, and for optics, they couldn't have Rishi Sunak. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
needed
that's
somebody who would look like actual British stock to preside over the Queen's funeral.
yeah. I mean, that could very well be true. I don't know.
I
So
I'm tempted to say that yeah, it is that they just chose a throwaway just for that purpose, and like I said, props for securing the bag. Nothing but respect, honestly. I would have done the same in that position, but I will say what I said last week and the week before, and every time we talk about this, it's a question of when rather than if this is going to be forced into a snap election. And how long is this guy going to last? You want to place your
well,
bets now, or you want to make your
he says he's not
speculations?
going to call for a general election.
That's what he says now. I mean, at this point, like, how long will he last? How long before he gets voted no confidence, and it does bring up the question like how how many cycles are like it's worse at this point with trust being there for 45 days to use the bellwether of dysfunctional parliamentary democracy. It's worse than the Italians at this point. Now,
Hmm.
I don't
Well, you
know
can
if that.
tell, like, you can tell Boris Johnson really thought he had a chance, right? Because he left his vacation. He's been on this month or more long vacation, right? Flies back to the UK, right? Within no time, secures 102 votes from the party, right? Because it's only the party that votes here. And then, like, people are thinking like, yeah, I think Boris, they're going to choose Boris Johnson. Somewhere along the way, he had to have gotten the talk, and today he says it's not the right time. Maybe in 2024. Very peculiar.
Oh, so return at the same time as Trump. They're really trying this bit here. Is that what I am to interpret from this? That they're going to
Mm,
that they're going to
hmm.
do like the double comeback thing and the whole time is a flat circle. Give me a break, man. No, I'm like
Oh
I
my God, it's such
yeah,
populists.
it's yeah, it's like I mean I have no doubt that's what they're trying to do, but like come on,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah, yeah.
absurd. It's
It's
not even
so
funny
it's so
anymore.
shallow. There's no substance to it. It's like that pawn shop meme. And at the top it says, voted for a guy who promised regulations on immigration, right? Can you? And the guy says, best I can do is an Indian prime minister.
Oh,
Like
it's
just to put into perspective, the Tories literally um, brought in 1 million people this year or last year. They broke every record that Labor ever had. And it's funny, like I mean, all of these people are absolutely loyal to the party. They cannot show any loyalty to the people, and they have to convince the people the direction that they're going on, right? Like the people have no one-to-one input, right? So the Tories literally just play this role where they like I always find it funny when people say this the most successful political party ever. It's like, yeah, like what is being like, the filter and containment party, like to what like the average British person wants,
I mean
really?
it is also a very strange definition of success that you've been able to hold on to power for so long, but you actually been able to accomplish your goals. Now, arguably they have been, considering that their goals are probably much different than what we would perceive them to be. But it it does get back to your point. Does being the filtration system, is that really that great of a destiny? Is that really what you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to be, but I'm sure we'll be back here on December 1st or within the first week of December telling you about the new British Prime Minister who is a Pakistani woman. That's my vague prediction. Um,
Well, actually, I forget her name, Braverman. I think she got into an argument with Liz Truss, or I think it was Liz Truss, over immigration. And she was saying, no, we cannot have more immigration. So, like, essentially, like, the Tories are like the conservative version of the Blairites, right? And I mean, they're really convinced that bringing in even more immigrants than last year, under like a devastated economy, is literally going to make them wealthier. No, I just would love to see it.
might make them personally
People have made
wealthier,
the
but
arguments that, like, oh well, they're going to financialize the economy, and just the way America did. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, America financialized its economy, and there are certain things, if they attack China on, China can withhold certain medicines that they need. How about Egypt today announced that they're dropping their pegging of their dollar on the US dollar, right? They're going to peg it with other currencies, so they're dropping the US dollar.
By
Like,
other currencies, that can only be presumed to mean the yuan, I would assume.
oh, for sure the yuan.
And I mean, I would say the euro, but that might be a rough patch for quite some time. But I mean,
Yeah.
I would assume the yuan and maybe the ruble, depending on how things go with the the conduct of Russia and Ukraine, how successful they are there. But now that you've brought that up, I do just have a brief amount of Middle Eastern news here. So
Mhm.
there were Israeli strikes on Syria once again as the crawl towards Idlib did continue, and as we are starting to see some of the final moves of the Syrian civil war. Now, we had discussed last episode that it's likely getting to a position where there is going to be a political solution. We talked about this with some of Turkey's actions in Syria over the past week, and once again, whenever there's these Israeli strikes, it is to sabotage or stymie something like that. If they can create a setback for Syrian forces advancing on these territories, that can delay negotiations for longer, hence prolonging the conflict. So, although it wasn't a massive strike, that's where we're at now. They're trying just to sabotage whatever talks or negotiations they can for the time being. Gazprom has signed a deal with Iraq to for energy development, so you have
Hmm.
further Russian integration there. And once again, the U.S., which had invested almost 20 years in this country, can't even get it to bend to its will. And you have all the billions, if not trillions, they'd put into this country being squandered by Iraq not even being tangentially under American influence. And I'm not going to get into
I mean,
what I think.
it is to a degree, but there's a poetic justice about it,
Oh, certainly. It's
about what's happening, because, like, you know, you have, for instance, remember when they invaded Iraq and they stole all the gold? 50 trillion in gold and oil was stolen, right? All based on lies, a million people dead. And, like, they literally lost that much. They had to inflate their dollar just like to, um uh, just to pay for the thing.
oh,
So
it is almost comical that these wars of plunder end up being more costly in the long run. Now, however,
yeah.
when it comes to things like that, like for example, the seizure of a lot of Iraqi and Syrian oil has gone to Israel, so we can see who is really benefiting from all of this here. Not that I think the Iraq War would have been a good idea, even if we were going in there to plunder for our own sake, but it's perhaps even worse to plunder a nation for another nation that refuses to get its own hands dirty doing that sort of thing. But that's aside the point. And returning to just brief Middle Eastern news, Turkey is now the gas hub that has been confirmed, and that they are starting new energy projects with Russia. And as we discussed somewhat earlier in the show, with the story about Croatia and Milanovic and the possible cooperation there for energy projects, it does look like the winds are starting to blow in that direction, with Turkey officially being the energy hub. And they managed to stave off. It's rather impressive the direction which Turkey has gone since the coup, because I figured, and of course I wasn't nearly as politically aware as I was in 2016 as I am now, that the coup, even if it wasn't successful, is going to be something that would keep Turkey firmly within the NATO orbit, firmly doing the West bidding in Syria, and serving the role that Turkey has served since the beginning of the Cold War. But now they are the energy hub. The West is really too timid or too cautious to do anything, at risk of, number one, pushing them further eastward, and number two, now that they're an energy hub, putting them in a position where they can withhold the energy as well. So it has. I can only say that one of the biggest winners of the 21st century thus far. I know we still have about 80 years, and it's 78 years left of this century to go. But like I'm just saying, Turkey has an early lead when it comes to successful nations and arguably even successful civilizations. And this also comes to the news that they are no longer providing drones to Ukraine. That
That's
program has
right.
been ceased, and that can only presumably be part of the gas hub deal that they stop supplying at least the drones to Ukraine and probably other arms and material support to Ukraine as well. So you,
Yeah, the other thing that should be added to that is
yeah, no,
they're
go ahead.
allowing more Russian subs in order to patrol the pipeline, the Turk Stream pipeline going into Europe.
Yeah, I'd not heard about that, but that's one thing I have brought up since the destruction of Nord Stream. That you had Hungary, who increased the security of Turk Stream on their end, but it only follows that, especially with Turkey becoming the gas hub once again, that it's going to not only for its own interest but for the interest of the country that it is receiving the gas from in the first place, going to beef up the security and do whatever it can to make sure the pipeline does not suffer the same fate as the Nord Stream pipelines. And the last piece of Middle Eastern news I have is that Mohammed bin Salman apparently had mocked Biden for his gaffes and has been questioning his mental state. Now, this is according to just an anonymous report, and this is after the Saudis snubbed Biden in general. There's speculation that Mohammed bin Salman just had a little bit of fun and more or less called Biden a senile old man, which
Yeah.
I won't say is inaccurate, but for the sake of not being a medical professional, not to draw the ire of whoever may be listening, I cannot say that's an official medical opinion. But there was that, and once again, we talked about the de-dollarization of Egypt, and now we have Saudi Arabia in an openly mocking and openly. I wouldn't necessarily call it hostile because military tensions between the two countries haven't necessarily increased, but in let's say an openly disrespectful and unflattering response to the U.S. president, and it's honestly unthinkable because even in the Obama era, when the president of the United States comes to Saudi Arabia or wants to call up Saudi Arabia, it's yes, sir, very good, sir. Here's what we can do for you. It was a very much straightforward client relationship that you had the master and the vassal. But that has just turned on its head in the course of what 2.5 years. I mean, maybe like late Trump era, but even Trump maintained a decent influence over the Gulf states. And you saw that with some of the Abraham Accords stuff. You saw that with some of his capitulation with their support for the war in Yemen. But now you just have a complete disregard for Washington. And I'm not even saying it's unjustified disregard on part of the Saudis and the other Gulf states in just the course of about 2 years, 2.5 years. And I don't see any reconciliation anytime soon. I know that they have been in vain trying to revive the JCPOA and trying to bring, again, the other Gulf and oil producing states in the region in on that as well. That has gone out the window. You could actually say that both Russia and China have completely one upped the U.S. in terms of that with both negotiations with Saudi Arabia and Iran because they have brought them closer to reconciliation than they have ever been. And if we do get the opening of embassies, that will be a completely new era in the Middle East. It will be. I'm not saying that you'll have a warm relationship between the Saudis and the Iranians, but you'll have a workable relationship. There won't be the risk
Mhm.
of them causing a massive proxy war with each other, which also will put the Saudis and the Gulf states in an interesting position with their stance towards Israel. Perhaps they would renege on that. Perhaps they would be something of a middleman between the two. And it also, if you have that reconciliation between the two, it puts Israel in a far weaker position than it was before because in 2020, end of the Trump days, you had it going to a position where, although it certainly couldn't be called a position of strength, Israel managed to at least secure the Gulf states as a non hostile force and just keep them as somewhat of a buffer between them and the Iranians, somebody that they would go through first before Israel. And you even had like some small degree of economic cooperation between the two. That still does continue as we speak. But as time goes on, as American influence wanes, as Saudi Arabia and Iran possibly reconcile and tensions are brought much to a much lower state in the region, well, how is Israel going to play in all this? It seems as if it's a country that is becoming increasingly irrelevant, even from just a purely strategic standpoint. Now, I know there are ethnic loyalties to Israel, very strong ethnic loyalties to Israel, but that can only do so much after a certain point. And at that point, I would think that again, the powerful Jewish populations, the moneyed Jewish populations, even view the United States as more of their project, at least at this point, than they do the
Yeah,
Zionist state. And I think that if push comes to shove, they're going to realize they're much better casting their lots with America than with Israel.
yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. It is going to go that way, and it's kind of funny, right? Like they wandered for 2,000 years, and there were periods of times where they wandered before, and many have decided that it's better to live in someone else's homeland.
Better to be diaspora
And
yet again than return to their home. I know it may sound a bit I don't know, a bit out of place to mention here, but it honestly is. I can't help but reference the works of E. Michael Jones that these people do. There is something lacking in them that I do believe at this point is just metaphysical. Like when it comes to this whole situation in general, when it comes to America juxtaposed to Israel, that they would prefer once again to be in the diaspora. I do think there is something that is just um, there is something metaphysically about the way these people think that's beyond any like base instincts or just simple
mhm.
emotions.
And there have been intelligent, pardon me,
We're
there
losing
have been
them.
intelligent Zionists who realize that you cannot have a country of just merchants and lawyers and doctors. That, like any other country, you can't just have niche segments.
I mean, if you actually want to talk about the early Zionist movement, which I won't get too far off on a tangent, it was very militaristic. It was very focused around making sure that this is a warrior culture. Now, you could say with the mass conscription that Israel employs to this day, to a degree it is. I mean, but even look at how many Israelis get out of that and how the military culture really compares to that of, let's just say, a more properly militaristic society. I won't go North Korea because that's probably the most extreme example you go. But even somewhere, I would say,
Mhm.
like, for lack of a better example, somewhere like Russia or Iran that have uh, a very strong martial tradition, and like, of course, the early Zionists were from a much different time, but there was the sense that they needed to establish a very martial tradition in that nation. It seems like even in 1948 that may have been there, but between 1948 and now, that has greatly dissipated.
Mhm.
But yeah, you do make a good point that again that a lot of these Zionists do at least have the self awareness to realize that hey, maybe this isn't the best idea to just become a nation of niche intellectuals. Perhaps this is how you get subsumed by your much more militaristic neighbors. But I will reiterate once again, there is far more that they can get out of casting their lots and being an elite diaspora in America and to an extent other Western nations than they can with their ethno nationalist project in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, I mean the logic of it made sense at the time. It's just it is a strange thing.
It's always something that they had to keep in their back pocket. There's a reason why, once again, the largest Jewish population outside of Israel is in the United States because, I mean, even after 1967, even after 1973, when they had these pretty overwhelming victories, there still was a lack of confidence in the Israeli state to serve their interests, which is why so many of them stayed in the diaspora. While they may have preferred Israel, at least to the later Soviet Union, I'm talking like Brezhnev onwards, they certainly prefer the United States to both. So
Hmm.
that's just a way of looking at it. I know some people have speculated, but at this point at least, there's not really an avenue into power in Russia or China. In fact, they seem to be divesting from Russia as we speak, and they never really had that much of a foothold in China in the first place. So it looks like America and the West in general is going to remain their base of operations for the time being, and even that isn't the greatest ship to be on, but it's the best they have at this point.
Right, and there is a kind of peace that's developing, right? Um, if you look at the last 3 years, Assad is back in the Arab League. Um, Iran and Saudi Arabia are not really as at each other's throats in the way they were. Yemen is unresolved, but particularly with the war in Ukraine and the direction that things are going on the economic front, they are definitely on the side that is to restructure completely um, the idea of the Bretton Woods Agreement. They are all firmly on the side that the Bretton Woods Agreement is not good for them. Even a country like Saudi Arabia, whose entire,
And they
whose
were even saying
dollar
that as
is
far back as like 73, and like it's been technically dissolved since 73, but again, like living in the afterburn of it, even they're saying that's still not good enough.
right, right. They've already started trading with China for oil, right? Because something like 77% of all their oil trade goes to Asia, right? And only about 10% goes to Europe. So, I can see them like I mean, they're in the process of pegging their dollar. What is it? It starts with the letter R, I believe. Anyhow,
Yeah,
they
just
like
gives
the
me.
Egyptians, they want to peg it to other currencies. They don't want it just pegged to the American dollar. So that's producing good things. And really, America, and to the same extent, Israel, are the only ones who want that region in conflict, right? The Israelis are afraid. I mean, the Israelis are looking at these drones by the Iranians, and they're thinking like, okay, this is serious, right? This is serious because these drones can completely overwhelm defense systems. Um, Now we've seen it. I mean, in a sense, the Bayraktar has been dropped because the Russians got so good at downing them that they no longer sell themselves. Right? It took a month and a half, and that was it. It was over. They were no longer the super weapon. Now, if you look also at Iran, right? They made a big deal with the Russians. They're shipping 40 turbines for like gas uh, pipes, right? Who would have thought Iran has 40 turbines, right? Can you imagine like the potential of Iran if it didn't have all these
Yeah,
sanctions and all the
I was just about to say this is a nation under heavy sanction that's still able to produce that. Now,
for
of
40
course, yeah,
years,
oh yeah, it's for longer than yeah. Once again,
42, 43, something like that,
since
right?
79.
That's right. That's right. And like they have their own commercial airliners, and they figured out like how could we dissuade the Americans from attacking us? And you know, they're using lawnmower engines essentially, and uh, cheap to produce vast quantities of drones that are low flying, hard for high tech to pick up. And I mean, this is what's kept America at bay, I guess, right? It's at least one of the factors. And you see crazy articles. Could America fight China, Russia, and Iran at the same time? Well, of course, it was Bloomberg, so it's implying like probably not. But the thing is the way America sees it, yes, we can. We have we have Poles, Balts, Georgians,
All the
a
people
whole
behind the
assortment
Bolshevik
of people from
Revolution.
the Anglosphere. right? We've got Taiwanese and Japanese that would be happy to fight for us. So they're invested, right, in keeping the tensions there as high as possible, even now that there are less reasons for that, right? Like when there's going to be, if there's going to be a political solution for Yemen, or it looks like it's leading there, America will panic, absolutely panic. And now they're saying to the Saudis, well, you know what? We're not going to sell you any more weapons. But do the Saudis look disturbed by it? I don't think so.
No, once
I don't
again,
think so.
Russia is the
Which could
largest
mean
arms
that they're
exporter
going
in
to
the world. And then
jettison.
China also
The,
has a large arms industry, so there certainly won't be
yeah,
hurting for it.
right, right. But it could also mean that let's say they start to cooperate, right? It could mean that they're going to maybe reach a conclusion in Yemen, right? Because the quote unquote official government of Yemen, needs arms, right? People forget there are Saudis and Qataris that are fighting in Yemen, right? And they're still not able to take these guys, even though these guys don't, the Yemeni rebels don't have the an air force, right? And so that Yemen could be a place where things start to quiet down, and Saudi Arabia is building this bizarre, linear city. I don't know. I see a lot of changes there, and I think the Israelis are afraid, like, of the Iranians moving more and more military infrastructure and striking them. Like, honestly, I think the Israelis exaggerate this. I don't think Iran is going to build a base to attack Israel from, personally speaking. I don't think
Well,
so.
at
I
that point,
think,
why not just wait them out? Like, it's
yeah,
time is on their side at this point.
right.
But that's all I had for the Middle East. I do have some brief news about the U.S. and China, unless you have any other Middle
Yeah.
Eastern stories.
No, that's all I've got. I'm
So,
anxious to get into China and US and see what
so
you have to say.
the U.S. It's just more news of strategic reserves and energy shortages. So, there's been yet another release from the strategic reserves in the quantity of about, I believe they said 2 million barrels would be released onto it. Once again, trying to keep those prices down and keep those prices stabilized before the midterms. Now, this is just possibly speculation. I can't really give you any solid numbers on that, but this is according to Bloomberg, so take that for what you will. As of Sunday, so by the time you hear this, it'll be 23 days, but it says the United States has just 25 days of diesel supply, which is the lowest since 2008, according to the Energy Information Administration. So, of course, diesel, very vital for the American supply chain, with semi trucks, which are the backbone of the American supply chain, along with the railways, running almost exclusively on diesel. So there is that, and if the stockpiles are that low in a time of energy crisis like this, that could spell something very bad. And this is also getting into the very heavy shipping season, with that string of end of the year holidays, whether that be Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, etc., where people will be shipping lots of. I don't know. You could see a curtailment if this crisis does continue, if this isn't rectified. Of You could see a curtailment of, let's say, the less necessary shipping, which I mean is going to cause discontent among the American population, of course. Although it may not affect their bottom line if they start saying, "Well, we're not shipping anything that isn't absolutely necessary, or we're only shipping so much that's not absolutely necessary." You're going to get people who are discontented, and you're going to get people that are whatever. Now, this will probably all come to a head after the midterms if this isn't rectified, but at this point, and perhaps maybe I'm too pessimistic, depending on who you ask, I really don't see any avenue of replenishing the supplies. I mean, I know they did the release from the strategic reserve, but I mean, diesel is a different fuel than, of course, the oil and the petroleum. So, I don't know if we have any backup avenue for that, or if we, or how much reserves we have for the diesel in particular. But if that's including both reserve numbers, I mean, it truly is a crisis situation. And I know that we've come so close to a lot of these crises being averted time and time again. Like We had the railroad strike that was averted that could have crushed the supply chain. And I mean, it just takes one of these to be successful in order for this system to grind to a halt. And I'm not saying this will be the one, but I can't say it won't be the one either. And again, it's important to point these things out that any one of these could be the thing that just crushes the American supply chain. In which case, maybe this is just alarmism from Bloomberg or whoever, but if I had to guess from what I know, and which admittedly is very limited, this is coming to a crisis situation.
Well, if the Republicans use the crisis of the strategic oil reserves, I'm going to call it election interference.
Okay, I'm liking where you're going with this. Get this man on CNN this instant.
Yeah. I mean, they have all the ammo that they could ever want. So they could easily get Joe on this if they wanted to, without having to be, because of course, the Biden team wants you to be pro-Ukraine and pro-Greta Thunberg, right? Um, so
Real
they're always going
Kaczynski
to,
hours.
yeah, they're always going to use like moral arguments to silence like actual issues, like as if you couldn't support Ukraine, right, and have a more reasonable policy on keeping America's oil reserve intact, right? So there it is. It's not government interference, despite what my fake CNN personality might say. The ball's in their court, right? Like they'll probably win. They'll probably take over the House, but let's see what they do. Because as you said, there's like 2 or 3 weeks now.
Yes, there's 3 weeks as of the date of airing. Will be
Mm,
exactly 3 weeks, which is November 8th. Will be the midterms. So
okay.
that will be on a Tuesday, of course, and we'll try to do an episode as soon as possible. Hopefully, we'll be able to record on the night after, so we'll be able to have out a couple of days after the election, just give an overview of how the midterm elections went. Next episode, of course, I will have my midterm maps put together with just a general prediction of how I think things are going to go. And I just finally do have some news regarding China here. And I'll start with the more interesting news about China first, which is there was a massive restructuring of the Communist Party of China there by Xi Jinping and his allies in the party. Uh, it was Hu Jintao, who was one of the former presidents of China, was more or less sent out walking with his head down. Now, granted, he is pushing 80. He's around Biden's age, so it's no surprise that he doesn't really have a place in the government anymore. And of course, before Xi Jinping changed the terms, he was uh, um, who was term limited. Of course, you had Xi Jinping get rid of the term limits, and he was elected to a third term by the Chinese Communist Party. Uh, and just this might be the worst part of it. For the first time in 25 years, there were no women in the Chinese Communist Party structure. So that's
Based.
oh no. This is why we have to fight China. I hope you know this is why I fight. This is why I lay down my life and bleed for the American Empire, because women belong in the CCP. But with that being said, you also had, and this is according to, once again, some dubious sources who may have more of an interest in rabble rousing with China, that there were very militaristic officials put in place, such as those who didn't necessarily want a reconciliation with Taiwan and want Taiwan's complete capitulation to the People's Republic of China. So you can see the direction things are starting to go. None of this was really too surprising, but it once again shows that the Shanghai factions, we'll call them, is being put out the pasture. And that's more the pro-Chimerica, the people who want to maintain that relationship and have a cooperation between the U.S. and China, whereas the people under Xi Jinping and that faction are trying to establish a more powerful China, as it were, in terms of economic and military and just on the world stage in general. So you had a lot of cleaning of house at the Chinese Communist Party, which was to be expected. You saw this as well in 2017. So it is a much smaller story than some would want you to believe. And like I said, it's they're grasping at so many straws that they have to point out, oh, there's no women in the party structure, blah blah blah. But perhaps more interestingly, is China has now become a larger car exporter than Germany, which Germany
Yes.
used to be one of the titans of it because it was always the U.S., Germany, and Japan vying for the top spot. And now Germany has been supplanted by China. Now China has been a major car exporter for quite some time, and as industrial offshoring continues from Germany, as industry becomes more and more unsustainable there, once again the two places it's going to go are to the U.S. and to China. And I believe it was from the German chemical industry, you had a lot of them reestablishing in China, and a lot of the automotive industry reestablishing in the United States. So, point being, and this doesn't only affect Germany, this is going to be a lot of major European companies are going to relocate to either China or the US because Russia is a closed market, and these are the two largest economies in the world as their economies become more and more functional. So, that is once again, and I mean, just considering the size of the global auto industry is a really a monumental thing when you think about it because again this is a major sector of both the US and the German economy and any country that manufactures cars that aren't necessarily like prestige cars I suppose you could refer to the Italians in that case but people who mass produce more let's just say practical cars it's always a major sector of their economy and it's something that gives them a lot of influence if you recall a lot of the original disputes around NAFTA in the early 90s was based a lot around the auto industry. You had the bailout of the auto industry in 08, 09 after the financial crisis. And it's always been a linchpin in whatever country it's established in. And it looks like China has now made its way to the top of that market. It was always pretty high up there, but considering the fact it's supplanted Germany, that is very telling. I believe that puts them in, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that puts them in third after the Japanese and the US respectively when it comes to auto manufacturing. And what's interesting is they don't really have their own domestic brands, more so manufacturing for others as well. Whereas you can point to several
Mhm.
American brands, you can point to several Japanese brands, you can point to several German brands, but you can't really, at least I can't name a Chinese manufactured, like a domestically manufactured Chinese car off the top of my head. And from my understanding, it's that they're manufacturing for other companies, whether they be German, American, Japanese, whatever. So it's just still a major breakthrough that will likely continue in the future. This probably isn't a trend, and especially given how Germany is looking at this time, I doubt the auto industry is returning anytime soon to Germany in the numbers that it once was, and that you can expect China to be a long term player in this position.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Chinese are they are ready to move in their own way. I mean, at this it's not officially a Congress; it's called something else. But um, he did say that he wants to speed up the time when um, Taiwan will be fully integrated into China. So, you know, we will see. Um, I think the plan was sometime between 2038 to 2044. I'm going to guess that the way things are going, it's going to be much sooner than that because the U.S. is now suggesting moving factories for their air defense systems to Taiwan.
Really putting all their eggs in one basket there, moving their air defense that is just absurd. And that is, I mean, it's creating a way where the U.S. cannot say no to intervening in a Chinese invasion to Taiwan if they're putting something that vital there. I mean, the superconductors or the microchips or whatever was one thing, but they're putting like military hardware manufacturing abroad. It is a full investment in that nation. It more or less is a commitment to defense, as unofficial as it may be, although there might not be a treaty signed to that. It is effectively a pact of defense to that nation. So that is once again just a far more brazen escalation than any of Biden's recent predecessors, even somebody along the lines of George W. Bush or Barack Obama, ever did. And it is in
Yeah, yeah.
that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, remember when everybody, when all the shit libs were worried that Trump was going to get us killed with China. I never, ever, ever believed them. Never believed them. Everything is short-term strategy, right? And Nicolas Soldo had an interesting tweet today that kind of sums it up. Something to the effect of sovereign is he who creates the narrative that bypasses objective reality. Something worse to that effect.
That's pretty good.
Because remember, they were all afraid that they were going to die because of Trump's rushed vaccine, and as soon as he lost, they were like waiting in line and condemning anybody else who wasn't going to take the vaccine,
and then trying to enforce federal mandates about it. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember.
yeah. They're absolute scum.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and that gets to the root of the problem is these people cannot think long term if their lives depend on it, which in some cases they quite literally do. So that's all the news
Yeah.
I had for this episode. What I thought was going to be an abridged episode still turned out to be almost a full 2 hours. So if you have any
Yes.
last minute stories, I suppose now would be the time. If not, I can go ahead and bring things to a close.
No, there is one ridiculous piece of news.
It
So
better
does it?
involve the name Aristovich, or else I'm not interested.
Well, he is part of Azov. Now he's half Ukrainian. Sorry, he's half Belarusian, half Russian. Rodnoy Botsman. So top Azov movement figure, former Russian Belarusian neo-Nazi Sergei Korotkik, on comments on Rishi Sunak. Quote, late Roman age, subjugated barbarians at the helm of empires. It's just perfect. His Rodnoy Botsman is his Twitter, sorry, his Telegram channel name, and you can read it there in the original Russian.
Little does he know this is what he's fighting for.
Yeah. You're disillusioning us. Stop.
Man, that's a perfect note to end the show on. So thank you everyone
Yeah.
for tuning in to this episode of the War Report. Once again, be sure to check out the Substack and BitChute pages where the episodes will be up early. I have the BitChute figured out. I'm still working on a method to get the MP3 files up. So we'll see you all next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.